Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. You are most welcome here. And today we're going to do our second ornament in the Big Thunder Mountain Christmas Tree Decorations series. And I'll link the first ornament there and down in the description. So today's ornament is going to be based on one of the many animals that you can see on the Big Thunder Mountain ride, and this one on the ride in Disneyland. Let's go have some fun.
So these little goats are made from mostly items in your kitchen, starting with the homemade air dry clay. Now, of course, you can use Model Magic if you want to, and I think they sell Model Magic at the Dollar Tree. You can get it a lot of places, but I like to make my own. It isn't exactly the same as Model Magic. It's a little bit, I want to say, softer. So you make this from baking soda, cornstarch, and water, and it's 2 parts baking soda to 1 part cornstarch and 1 part water. So here I'm using a cup of baking soda and a half a cup of cornstarch and a half a cup of water. And I apologize for the stove footage, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like as it's cooking. So you're going to cook that over medium heat and just keep stirring it. And it really doesn't take very long at all. I want to say 5 minutes before it starts to get quite thick. So pretty soon you basically just have a clump of clay, and then remove it from the heat, and it is going to be warm. You're going to want to knead it, but wait, of course, until it's cooled enough so that you can touch it. And then when you knead it, you can use a little bit of additional cornstarch if you need to. I didn't really need any additional cornstarch with this recipe. I have seen other recipes that have more water in them, but with this one, I didn't need additional cornstarch. So just knead that once you've gotten it out of the pan, and then you'll have some air dry clay that you can use. When you're not using the air dry clay, you can wrap it tightly in plastic wrap and maybe even store that in an additional plastic bag, although I don't think that I did that. And it'll keep for quite a while. Now, because air dry clay has a tendency to crack, what I did was I built a little goat armature that I plan to put the air dry clay over. So I have an example of one that I already built here, and then I'm going to create another one for you so you can see the process. Now for the armature, again, we've got some kitchen items here. I'm using mostly aluminum foil, but you could probably use something else like newspaper. I find aluminum foil works well because it's quite strong and stiff when you roll it up into a ball. And then I'm also using masking tape, and I'm using 22 gauge florist's wire. So basically, to begin, to make the little body, I roll the aluminum foil into 3 balls, a larger ball in the middle, and then equal-sized smaller balls for the front and the back, and tape that up. I made small balls for the neck and for the head, and I tried to get that fairly goat-shaped. I looked at pictures of goats. I don't know how successful I was. I did the best I could. And then for the little legs, I rolled up the tinfoil a little bit thinner and long enough so that I could tape it up to the body and then, tape those on. I don't think I did a very good job of getting that weird shape of the back leg of the goat. They have that odd sort of knee joint, and maybe you can do a better job than I could. I think I probably should have not even tried and just tried to make them straight, because one of my goats couldn't stand up. Not that they need to stand up, they're going to hang on a tree, but it would have been nice. Now, for the horns, I just doubled up that florist wire just to make it a little bit thicker, and then taped those to the head. Now, I also used a little bit of tape to sort of mark where I was going to put the ears and the tail. I'm not sure how necessary this was, and I just want to suggest some alternatives. When my goats were drying, one of the goats lost his ear, and I was able to easily just glue it back on. It wasn't a big deal, but the Model Magic isn't super strong, so the pieces do break off, and I'm talking about my own air dry clay, but I found that with the name brand Model Magic as well. It's just the nature of this stuff. So possibilities are, first of all, just not to put the tape ones on because they just kind of get in the way when you're using the Model Magic, and just put them on using Model Magic and know that one might fall off and you might have to glue it back on. Or we're going to cover these with sort of a fake fur, so you could give it felt ears and a felt tail. So just some alternatives here. So once you have all of your armatures created for all of the goats that you're going to make, and I made 3, then you can cover that with the Model Magic. And this is maybe going to sound a little bit strange, but I tried to do this in a sort of anatomical way. So when I was a little girl, my parents had these drawing books, and sometimes I would get up early in the morning and I would try to do some drawings from these drawings books. I think they were called How to Draw. And my favorite one was the animals book. I think probably the still life wasn't that interesting to me and the people were intimidating, but I really liked to draw animals. And the way that these books taught you to draw animals, you drew sort of ovals. So like if you were going to draw a goat, you would draw an oval for sort of the belly, and then ovals for those larger muscles for the legs in the front and the back, and oval for the neck and oval for the head, which is sort of how I built the armature. And it's also how I'm putting the air dry clay on. Now, maybe people don't draw that way anymore. Maybe you were never supposed to draw that way. But it does help me to draw something that looks a little bit more realistic. And I feel like with these goats, it did help me to create a body structure that felt like a little more real than I think if I had put it together in a different way. So I tried to put the clay on, around the belly, and then to do the sort of muscles of the legs, and then put the clay down the legs. I also used wire to create a wire hanger for the back of the goat and taped that down to the goat. Now I figured that probably where it would be the center of gravity for the goat would be closer to the head and not towards the back, because there's a lot of sort of mass up near the front of the goat. So it's basically right at the base of the neck, and that did seem to work out best for where to put the hanger. The goat that I'm modeling here, sort of, it's really going to be my own goat. It's only inspired by the Big Thunder Mountain goat. But the goat that's the animatronic goat that's at Disneyland in California, and I've never been to Disneyland. I've only seen pictures and videos of this goat, but it's very cute and it has a stick of dynamite in its mouth. So I thought that would be cuter than if I just made a regular goat like the goats that I have seen at Disney World. So for the head, I'm doing the lower jaw and the face and upper jaw separately and making the mouth open so that it can hold something that looks like a little stick of dynamite. And I have these little dowels that somebody gave to me, and this is the perfect application for them. They are different diameters. And the dowel that I ended up using was a 1/4 inch diameter. That seemed to look best for the size of goats that I'm making here. And then finally I fashioned the little tail and the little ears, and I put the clay over the little horns. And I had started to try to put in some facial features, and then they just looked creepy to me. So I figured rather than put in any indentations or anything, I would just paint them on. And my goats, well, I feel like one of them looks more like a little calf than like a goat. But hopefully with the horns and the dynamite in their mouths, they will look sufficiently like goats that it will be okay. And I hope that you are able to do better and make something that looks more like a goat. Now, I want to say, if you want to make a Big Thunder Mountain Railroad tree and you don't have time for all this, I'll bet that you can buy little plastic goats or something and then just paint a little dowel red and glue it to their face, and you've got yourself a little, Billy the goat from Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, and that would look just great. I wanted to try to make these basically from scratch, so that's what we're doing here. Now, you want to let those dry completely, so I would say at least 24 hours. I guess it depends probably on humidity, but just feel them and see if they've dried. They'll be pretty hard when they've dried. Now, even though I had put the air dry clay over an armature, it's still cracked on some of them in some places, and as I mentioned before, one of the ears came off. So what I did was I glued using hot glue, and I use a low temperature hot glue gun. I just glued the ear back on, and then where I felt like the cracks were very deep, I filled it in a little bit with hot glue. This really isn't going to show, but I didn't want any of it to come apart. So I thought, let's just start by gluing it together and keeping it as strong as possible at the base. So then with them glued and dry, what I did was gave them each a base coat of this paint, which is what I call my knockoff sheepskin paint. I had a nice folk art chalk paint, which was in the color sheepskin, and it dried up. So this is just acrylic paint. It's just apple barrel white acrylic paint, and I put in a drop of yellow acrylic paint, which I got at the Dollar Tree. And I feel like the color is a pretty good match for the sheepskin color. It's just basically an off-white. And in fact, it's so close to the color of this air dry clay that it's difficult for me to tell where I have painted these guys and where I haven't. But I did just want to give them a base coat. So these goats are going to be white and a sort of tan. Now, if you look at the goat that's at Disneyland, it is white and gray. And of course, you can do any goat that you want. These are your goats. I'm going to be putting some tan fur on it. So I want the skin, so to speak, underneath to match the color of the fur that I'm going to put on it, so that if you can see through the fur, you're seeing basically the same color. And I didn't really have gray, so that's why mine are tan. So with the sheepskin color base coat dry, I'm now going to paint on some features and paint where I'm going to put the tan fur on versus the white fur. So on my device you can see I have a picture of, I think he's called Billy the Goat, from Disneyland. And I thought I would do roughly the same features for the face, so roughly the same white coming down the nose and down his chest. And I also wanted to look at just the way a goat nose and goat eyes look, at least according to Disney. So I started with some brown, and I think this is just my burnt umber paint. And I painted their little hooves, and I painted the nose, I painted around the mouth, I painted the eyes, and I painted the horns. So that's just a sort of a first coat with the brown. Then I mixed up a sort of grayish brown color, and I'm using a gray chalk paint from Folk Art, but I'm not positive which color that is. And I'm mixing that with my burnt umber. So this is because I only have chalk paint that's gray. I don't have any acrylic paint that's gray, and I liked that color basically, but you could of course use an acrylic paint or mix up your own gray or grayish brown. And I didn't paint all three goats exactly the same. I thought it would be fun to have a little bit of variation. So like two of them have gray tails, one of them has a white tail, and I did different things with the legs as well. But I just wanted to make them some combination of gray and white, and I didn't try to do any spots on them. You know, I've seen goats, they have little spots sometimes, but I thought I would try to keep it fairly simple. And then I painted the inside of their mouths with this top-notch paint in light peach. I think I got that at Joann's. And I just wanted to paint the inside of the mouth, you know, something that looks like inside of a mouth color. Now then, to add to their features, I took a little bit of black paint. Again, this is just apple barrel acrylic black paint. And I put black stripes on their horns. I added some black to the eyes and the nose, just little dots. And then I went in with the white, and I put a white stripe to make it look like it was a little bit dimensional on the horns. So I put white stripes, and then just like a little dot of white in the eye. Now, even though you're not really going to be able to see this paint job very much, I just didn't like how bright it was, so I made a wash of water and my burnt umber brown acrylic paint, and I washed over the horns with that and then wiped it off a bit. So I just wanted to dull that bright, it's off-white a little bit, and then I decided that I wanted to do it on the fur too, so I also brushed that over the gray part of the bodies, and it really looked quite a bit better after I brushed the brown over it. And now, once the goats are painted, I have a coat of the non-glossy Mod Podge, the matte Mod Podge, and I just covered the goats with that to seal them, because we're going to be gluing onto these goats, and the glue will just pull the paint off of them if they're not sealed. Okay, so you might want to stop here, especially if you're good at painting and if yours are shaped better than mine, if they came out better than mine. This is very time consuming, this next part. but I wanted my goats to be furry, and honestly they end up looking more like sheep than goats. I couldn't help it. I had to leave their fur a little bit long because I thought that they were cute. But anyway, the way I did this was I took yarn, and this is yarn from the Dollar Tree. This off-white color is Aran. That's the name of the color, but any off-white color that you like, of course, will work just fine. I wouldn't use the white, it's very, very white, it's very bright. Aran is the currently available off-white color that they have. And then for the brown parts, I used a color which is called grayish tweed. Yes, it's called grayish tweed. And I really love the color. I think the name is funny. Anyway, what you're going to do is you're going to cut a lot of little tiny pieces of yarn. And these are, I don't know, it looks like they're maybe half an inch. You want to make them long enough that you can glue them down to the goat. So part of them is going to be glued to the goat. But then what we're going to do is sort of fluff them up, untwist them, and then trim them. So the goat will have sort of some curly fur. Now most of the white ones that you cut are going to be short, but I wanted him to have longer fur just sort of on the chest, sort of like a little billy goat beard, but more on the chest than on the chin. And those I cut to maybe more like a half an inch. I would say don't cut them too long because they are hard to untwist, and you're going to trim all of the yarn anyway. But basically what you are going to do is cut all these little pieces of yarn, and then you are going to glue them all over the goat's body. So try to glue them as close together as you can, and try to glue them so that as little of the yarn is glued down as possible. So you want it to stand straight up as much as possible from the goat. And again, I did this sort of anatomically, and with the legs, start at the bottom of the legs and work up. Same thing with sort of the torso, start at the bottom and work up so that the yarn is layered over itself. Now I used hot glue to do this, and I would put the yarn on and then I would press it in with scissors. I had to work fairly quickly. I think the most pieces of yarn I could put on at once turned out to be 3. Sometimes I could put on a little row, like if I was doing a large area on the side, and maybe put 4 pieces in if I was very quick. But it is a slow process. But we're crafting because we like to craft, right? And when you see how happy this little goat is with all of his fur, you'll know it was worth it. Okay, so I did this goat head to tail in white so that you could see the process. So obviously I have a lot more to do with the grayish tweed. But then what I did was I had this very large needle, it's like a rug needle, and I used that to untwist the yarn. So it's actually pretty easy with the shorter pieces of yarn. You just stick the needle in and pull it up, and as long as the yarn is well glued, it just fluffs the yarn up. Now some pieces of yarn are going to come out, especially if they just weren't glued down that well. But you see the basic idea. You just want to make sure you get every single piece of yarn, and this doesn't actually take that long. Gluing the yarn on takes a really long time, but fluffing it doesn't take very long at all. And then once you've got him all fluffy, then trim it so that you can see the shape of his body more or less. I couldn't bring myself to trim it really, really close because I just thought it was very cute with the sort of longer fur. Now, you may be looking at the pile of trimmed fur and thinking, hey, why don't we just glue that directly onto the goat? And maybe you can make that look okay. I actually, of course, did a little bit of a prototype before I decided how to do this, and I just had a little disc of the air dry clay, which I sealed, and then I did both techniques on it. I glued the pieces of yarn, fluffed them, and trimmed them, and then I took what I had trimmed off and glued it onto the sample, and that's the part on the bottom. So the part on the top is the goat, and the part on the bottom is the extra fluff, and I just didn't think it looked very good. But maybe you could do it better, or maybe you think it looks fine. I think other alternatives are maybe you could put felt on this guy, or of course there are different ways you could make it. You could sew it, you could felt it. Here's the grayish tweed now, and we're going to do the brown parts of the goat. And I'm not trying to bore you, I'm going to speed this up, but I did want you to see sort of the order in which I put the yarn on and how it looks as I do the yarn. Okay, so here's the goat fully yarned and partially fluffed and trimmed. And see how happy he is? So yeah, this was definitely worth the work. And then here he is after I've done some fluffing and trimming, and he definitely looks more sheepdog than goat. So turning to the sticks of dynamite, I have those 1/4-inch little pieces of dowel. So I'm just cutting them a little bit shorter, just cutting them to, it looks like about 1 inch, but whatever seemed like it was a good length for a stick of dynamite for these goats, you know, for the size of these goats. And I'm going to paint those red. So the paint that I have here is Craft Smart acrylic paint in Tuscan red. And I'm going to give those a coat of the Tuscan red, just cover the entire little piece of dowel, including the little ends. Now, with that dry, they look okay. We could probably use them this way, but I felt like this is a goat who stole some dynamite from a mine. It's probably a little dirty down there. And I wanted to dry brush a little bit of something that would look sort of like dirt onto them, or, you know, dust or whatever. Now I started with my burnt umber, and that just didn't look great. So I added a little bit of black acrylic paint to that, and then just dry brushed that over the sticks. Now we'll just seal those little dynamite sticks with some non-glossy, some matte Mod Podge. And finally, for the little sticks of dynamite, this is black florist wire that I had bought at the Dollar Tree. It's very thin, and I wanted to use that for the fuse for the dynamite. And I was able to just hot glue that to the end of a dynamite stick. I did bend over the end of each of the fuses, only because the wire is a little bit sharp. I think as an alternative, you could of course use a little bit of the black twine or a thick black thread. I wanted the wire because I wanted it to stand straight out from the little fake stick of dynamite, but I didn't want it to be sharp at the end, so I bent it over. I then just hot glued the dynamite sticks into the open mouths of the little goats. And here's how they look on the tree with the lanterns that we already made. Here they are with the lights off. And here's how they look with the lights on.
So, what did you think of our little goat ornaments? They were a lot of work to make, but I feel like the result was definitely worth it. And you could cut out some of the steps. For example, you could buy a goat and then just put a little stick of dynamite in his mouth and just add it to your tree. It's not supposed to be stressful, it's supposed to be fun. Or you could stop at the painting and not put all the fur on, which was really the part of this that took so much time. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That tells me that this is the sort of content that you enjoy, so I can bring you more. And if you like this sort of content, please subscribe to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with us today. Take care.